Divorce is widely regarded as one of the top stressors in life. There are so many aspects that we have to consider to manage and navigate the many changes that our family has to go through. But when there's a family member with special needs, it adds a whole new dimension to the transition. My guest today is Mary Ann Hughes from Special Family Transitions, and we're going to talk about divorce support when there are special needs. Mary Ann, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sinta, for having me speak on this important topic, which sadly happens to a lot of families, but here to shed some light on how we can get through that.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. So, starting off, can you please tell us how you got to working with us specifically?
Sure. So I'm the mom myself of two children, now young adults, on opposite ends of the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I was married for 21 years when I was faced with divorce. Unexpectedly, wasn't something I saw coming, but one day it happened. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had to figure out how to navigate that, how to get through that, not just emotionally, but I need to do for my children so that they could have the best outcome possible because their needs are going to be lifelong. And I had to make sure that they would be taken care of for to through this process as well as afterwards.
Mm. Okay. So you have lived experience of the challenges that families face. And it must be, you mentioned that your children are on opposite sides of the spectrum. Can you maybe just briefly explain to us what that means?
Sure. So autism is a spectrum, meaning some people, it's quite visible that they may have autism.
Mm-hmm.
You may see some behaviors, some limited social skills, some limited language, and different types of stereotypical behaviors we may associate with autism. And then you have some people who are more what we consider what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. So, for instance, they may be high functioning and very intelligent. Not that the others can't be as well, but they have a lot of skills and you may not know that they're on the spectrum, except they may have some ways they like to do certain things and certain behaviors and certain other ways that they're affected. And for instance, there's very high profile people who either have said they're on the autism spectrum or people have said that they might be. For instance, like Albert
Mm-hmm.
Einstein and Elon Musk and people like that. So people who have great contributions to society, but they have a different way of thinking, and that's what autism um, is a it's a neurological condition, but it just means how your brain is wired and how you interact with the world, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I can imagine that that must be quite a challenge raising a family with those special needs. How does it how is it affected when separation happens, when the divorce process kicks in?
Right. So, as you mentioned, raising children with special needs, no matter what their age, is definitely very difficult.
Mm,
Dealing with the diagnosis and the things that go along with that, and special education, and trying to get them services, and having them be the best person they can be, getting the skills they need to function as best they can. And
mm,
so, usually, it's a team effort, not just within the family, but also in the community. But when divorce happens, basically your lifeline is kind of cut in half, right?
mm,
The
mm,
supports that you used to have maybe aren't there anymore in terms of your partner and extended family and maybe access to funds and taking care of those situations and even getting breaks for yourself so that you
yes.
can recharge and take care of your kids in the best way possible. So many things happen. But as a special needs parent, some people like to call it, you're always worried about the future. What's going to happen to my kids as they grow, as they develop? Will they develop independent skills? Will they be able to go to work? What will happen when they age out of school? And so many questions.
Mhm,
And so when you're going through divorce, it kind of compounds. You're trying to not only deal with the changes that you're going through in terms of your family, but also how do you plan for the future as part of the divorce, which to me was important to do. Some
mm,
people feel like, okay, we'll get divorced and then think about it. But really, to me, it's something that needs to be worked on at one time to think about that. So when you're making your divorce agreements and plans, then hopefully you're doing in such a way that the child is put first and their needs are going to be met so that you can have a better co-parenting relationship in the future. So given all that, that's what brought me to where I am today, because I went through that process. It took me a long time. It took me so much time and effort, energy, and money as well, frankly. And I spent way so much of these resources. I thought it was kind of silly for all these families who go through this to have to recreate the wheel, because I couldn't find resources really to help me in my divorce. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to help other people. I went through all this effort. I became a certified special needs divorce coach now. I have other certifications as well. And that's why I created my company, to help families who have children with various disabilities when they're going through divorce, so they can consider what they need to do and think about, and hopefully have a good process during the divorce and after as well.
Mm. Sounds amazing. I think there's definitely a big need for that. In what aspects do we, or are we supposed to manage or navigate a divorce decidedly different when there are special needs in the family compared to how it's normally? And I actually, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, yeah, there's so many ways that we are handling divorce that is not right and not healthy, and there's a lot wrong with it anyway. But what are the biggest differences?
Right. So for one, the needs of the child may be lifelong. So some people go into
Mm,
divorce saying, okay, we'll divide up our assets and pay child support till the child is 18. Well,
mm,
the child is not miraculously going to be uh, not have autism or any other disability when they turn
yes.
18. And so how do we handle that? How can we either continue child support, which by the way, in some states you can do past
Mhm,
18, and in Texas where I am, is can be lifelong. A lot of people don't know
mm,
that. You can have what they call above guideline child support and different ways to make sure that the child's taken care of, whatever ways you can come up to. And hopefully you do it in an amicable fashion. Otherwise, people end up, spending lots of time, money, and energy battling these things out. And like you said,
yes.
the other stresses of divorce become compounded in this
Mm,
situation. So that's just one uh, thing that you've got to consider. But two is, how is this going to affect the kids? How do you help them navigate the process? How do you help them deal with their grief and the transition process they're going through? And so
mm,
I had a hard time finding people, honestly, to help me in that process. And so partly because um, a lot of mental health professionals aren't used to having those kind of clients, and especially for those who are not verbal or can't have the behaviors or understanding to have a true counseling session. That was kind of a stumbling block for me to find somebody who was willing to do that. And so what I ended up doing was creating my own way of supporting them. Definitely, I've tried to find people to help for sure in the schools, and other people were supportive. But I created what they call the social story, which is something that people in the autism world and other professionals may be familiar with who work with children with disabilities. Is this an
mm,
easy to understand way of explaining to a child or young adult, for that matter, what's happening and what they can expect, so that the transitions are less stressful? Because people with autism sometimes have a hard time adapting to change and transitions. And so I'm trying to
mm.
try my best to turn it into as positive experience as I could, so they knew they were safe, they knew what to expect, and that we would get through this together, that they're loved, no matter what. No, even if mom and dad aren't living together, they're still important and their needs will be met.
Yeah, because I think the day-to-day living is quite adversely affected. As you mentioned, the stability, the routine, the structure, and everything that many of the children with special needs really need in order to thrive can be disrupted. And then moving between two houses is also something that could be very disruptive to certain people.
Exactly. So you want to create as much stability and routine, like you mentioned, so
Mm,
that if you can have a plan where both parents, what the schedule is going to be, they can plan ahead for that. They can know in their mind, okay, this is, you know, Monday, Friday, I'm going to see dad or spend the night with him or whatever it might be. And so one way to visually represent that, because all children are very visual and learn that way, is
mhm,
you have a visual calendar. So you can have a calendar that marks the days of the week in one color, that they're with mom, and when
mhm,
they're changing and going to dad, and so on and back and forth. So that way there's less anxiety about when am I going? When am I getting back? What is this going to look like? And things like that.
Mm. So if I'm a parent, and let's say I was the primary caregiver for my child who's on the spectrum, and my child spent 80 or 90% of the time with me, and now that I separate from the child's father, how do you negotiate the shared parenting? Because we always hear that we need to act in the child's best interest. What would be in the child's best interest? Certainly not 50-50 or shared parenting where the child now suddenly has to go and live with a parent who's not used to taking care of them, or the child is not used to them. How does that play out?
That's a great question, because I was just in a presentation this week about someone talking about 50-50 possession. And
Mhm.
so it works for some families, and some families with special needs children do that for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
Uh, but like you said, it may not be in the child's best interest. It may not be practical based on one parent being the primary breadwinner and one who's had more of a caregiving role and is used to those type of responsibilities. So not
Mm.
to say that both parents can't work, and not to say that the other parent can't learn those things, which they should, because they're going to be spending time with that child and need to be brought up to speed. But you've got to say, what in our situation, what works best? Is it best for someone to have more parenting time and the child have
Mm.
stability there, where the other parent maybe has a higher potential for supporting um, the children and has more potential to have a higher income and then maybe having less time.
Mm.
So it's all a balance. And so some people think, well, 50-50, that means one parent won't have to pay child support, which is not the case. Right? A lot of people
Yeah.
start with that, or are advised by their attorneys perhaps to put that on the table, when really that's not really what they want, and it's really not the best answer for the
Mm.
child. So yeah, all these things should be taken into account. Really, what's best in our situation? How could we make this work so that the child is taken care of as best they can by each of those parents during their time?
Mm. And I think it's important that we might take for granted, but I want to just say it for people who don't have experience of divorce. There is no one size fits all divorce package or settlement agreement or parenting plan. It's really unique to every family. And it's important that every family can sit around the table and iron out the details of how they're going to do it, so that every child can receive the proper care and support that they need, and that the parents can be able to parent as much as they are able to or capable of, and also get a break. I'm so glad you mentioned it earlier, that you need to take breaks also. So the whole responsibility can't come down on the shoulders of one parent only.
Right. And so that becomes a challenge, because as a caregiver, and especially needs parent, we experience a lot of burnout, some depression. We're just overwhelmed by everything we have to do. And we
Mhm.
don't realize that we have to make time for self-care. And I learned that the hard way, in terms of, knowing that if I took care of myself, and that's why I share with my clients as well, the better that we can be and take care of ourselves, then we can take better care of our kids, make better decisions in
Yes.
divorce and other areas of our life. So this
Mm.
divorce may seem like it goes on forever, but it is a finite process. We want to be the best that we can be, surround ourselves with the best team that we can, or just, come about it in a way that we're thinking about, but the goal and the vision in divorce, what is that we want our life to look like? What does this child need, and how can we get there, as opposed to fighting over the reasons for divorce, or
Mm.
fighting about money, which sadly, happens a lot in,
Yes. Yeah.
divorces, but not focusing on that, but focusing, okay, what does the child really need? And what is that going to cost? And how can we together, address the cost as well as the time and care? And both parties bring so much to the table. So it's not like a caregiver doesn't have a value. That is a tremendous
Mm.
value that person brings, and they've given up income and the ability to work perhaps, and maybe they have to find other sources of income, but we want to make it work for all the parties so that that child can have the best life possible.
Yes. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there is still, sadly, to a large degree, a perception that stay-at-home parents, who are the primary caregivers, are not that busy or not working that hard. I still see it to this day where people come to me and say, my partner asks me, but what do I do all day? So they don't grasp how much work and effort goes into it. And especially with a child with special needs, you can more than double that, I think.
Right. As an example, yesterday was a really hard day for me. I had
Mhm.
um, my mom. So sometimes you have a parent taking care of an elderly parent. So that can take a
Mm,
lot of energy. And you have things that came up with both my children that I had to address
mm,
physical um, concerns in terms of some injuries or some health issues, some anxiety issues, balancing the day. Uh, Things not working out of the program, you've got to pick them up, be available. So yeah, so even though, if you put it down on paper, you may not see that many things that
mm,
so-called, what are you doing with your day? But really it takes a lot of emotional energy and planning to make everything run smoothly. And so it's always on your mind. It's not like you can just drop them off and think that everything will be okay that day. You may be needed at a moment's notice to come and support your child in whatever way it might be. And you're always planning ahead, working with medical professionals, therapists, depending, like my kids are older, so we're working on a transition
mm,
program. Every stage of a child and their development requires different types of um, um, things that you need to do as a parent and plan for the next step. So it never ends. It's not like
yes.
one day
Yeah.
they're in school and then everything is set. No, every year you have to reevaluate, every week sometimes and month,
Mm.
things are going to change. So you're always on call, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's a hands-on parenting that is required, especially when there are special needs. Like you said, there's constant adaptations, transitions, changes that need to be navigated. Sure. Um, I have actually on this podcast interviewed people with children with special needs that are already adults. They're in their 30s, but they are still dependent. They're still reliable on that care, on that daily care, and sometimes literally hourly care. So they still live at home. So there is always a parent who ultimately needs to be responsible, and I almost want to say on duty, to supervise, to care for, and to ensure that that individual is safe and nurtured and all those things. So it's a full-time job, actually.
Right, and it ever ends. I was at an event this weekend and somebody I hadn't seen in years, and our kids were little at the same time. And she said, "Oh, now she's an empty nester." Like, well, that will never be my reality because I'll have definitely at least one of them continue to live at home and need constant support, and
Mm,
one who's going to need ongoing, like you said, support to check in and help guide them and alleviate whatever stress to help them to the next phase of life or day to day challenges that come up. So yeah, we're always going to be needed, and so sadly, some parents are not involved. There are cases where one parent no longer wants to be in the picture, or because of geography can't, and so then all that weight demands are on one parent, and that's really hard. And so yeah, it doesn't leave you time much for a break, and that's why we have to try to incorporate that or find ways to grow and to find other meaning and way and fulfillment in our lives in addition to just our daily care of our kids.
mm, mm. Something that's quite common in divorce also is the stigma that unfortunately still surrounds it. Many people don't talk about it. They don't want the world out there to necessarily know that they're separated or that they're going through a divorce, which means people don't reach out for help also. That's the one thing. And the other thing is, I think our communities and our schools and our organizations aren't really geared specifically to offer and provide support for families that are going through divorce. You mentioned the geography. Often one of the parents move out of the house and maybe go into a different geographical area that's maybe not so close anymore. So they lose that community that they were part of, and they have to start again in a different community. And when they don't talk about what they're going through, they don't get that support at all. What is your experience with communities and societies giving support? when especially with people not really wanting to talk about their problems and their challenges, or even many people are afraid to reach out and ask for help.
Right. So when I was first faced with divorce, I considered it kind of a taboo subject and I didn't really share about it. I kept it to myself.
Mm,
I thought, okay, well, either maybe things will get better and this will go away. I won't have to tell people. Or, yeah, I was afraid of judgment. I was afraid what was going to
mm,
happen. How was I going to get through this? And so for myself, I tried to seek some professional assistance when I got to that point in my grief cycle. But a lot of people are concerned about that. But I can tell you that when I did share with people, I received nothing but support. They knew who
mhm,
I was, they knew my values and my commitment to my children. And so I was never looked down upon or judged like I had fears that might happen. So I would say if you're going through divorce or thinking about it, don't be afraid to reach out, tell family, friends, because they can provide a lot of support. They can be there
mm,
for you, share their perspectives. Now, you got to be careful in terms of the advice you might get. Some may be good, some may be bad. But I can tell you one of the best pieces of advice I got was to take your time. Don't rush this because decisions you make now are going to affect you for a lifetime. So that kind
mm,
of helped me say, okay, let's kind of slow down and think about,
mm,
what's really best for me and for my kids and do this the right way. Because I've seen
mm,
people who it's end up in a situation where it's not a um, good outcome. There's still conflict, and years later they're still having court battles. So we want to do this in a way where everyone's needs are taken into account and respected, and find a way to hopefully find a way that we can separate and divorce, but yet maintain good communication or as best we
mm,
can for the sake of the children and for the co-parenting, because that's never going to end as well, right? You've got,
mm,
as mentioned before, a typical child at 18, you don't have to have contact with the other parent. But when you have a
mm,
child with special needs, there's going to be lifelong needs for that child, and there's going to be need to communicate and be at events together, perhaps, whatever. So we want to hopefully do it in such a way that promotes a positive relationship and a good role model for your kids so that they're not feeling like they're stuck in the middle.
It's so hard to go through divorce and to do everything right. It's a huge responsibility to be a parent, and it's difficult. And I want to just acknowledge that apart from being heartbroken or deeply disappointed or going through a grief process, as you also mentioned, you have to make all these decisions and negotiate and all sorts of things. It's really, really challenging. So I always encourage my clients to take a bit of time and allow themselves to just process the disappointment, the disillusionment, the grief, the mourning of the loss of the marriage, and that sort of stuff before they start negotiating or separating and working out the details, because then they're in a better place to think clearly and to also come up with plans and solutions that are sustainable. That's very important to me also, because we always hear do everything in the children's best interest, put the children first. But I feel very strongly about coming up with an arrangement or an agreement that is truly sustainable by both parents also. Because if they can't sustain it, or if they have to bend over backwards to be able to do the things or provide how they should, and they can't sustain it, it's also detrimental to the children.
That's right, because they're going to feel that stress. And
Mm,
so, yeah, I mean, that's great advice that you gave to kind of process what you're going through first before rushing to make decisions. You may not make the right decisions or maybe find the right representation if you're in the frame of mind where you're trying to get revenge or you're trying to
mm,
hurt the other person. And that's, that may be your short term interest or feel like that should be, but really,
mm,
that's what we talked about. What is your vision? What really is important to you at the end of the day? What
mm.
would you like to get out of this divorce process that's going to benefit you and the children and the kind of relationship you may have with your ex-spouse in the future?
Yeah, because co-parenting is what you're stuck with for time to come. So can you maybe give us some examples of what are the main pain points for families with special needs? We're talking about special needs children. And I'm thinking also that one of the parents or one of the adults in the family might also have special needs, which again is a different thing. But can you perhaps give us some examples of what the main pain points or common pain points that you see, challenges that families face in these
Right.
things?
Right. So I will say, to your other point, so a
Mm,
lot of families who have a child with a disability or um, autism, a lot of it is genetic in nature. So you may have
mm,
one parent who either is diagnosed or maybe not diagnosed, and they may have
mm,
some tendencies. So that does complicate things, and there's a whole
yes.
nother, like you said, discussion around that. But given that, yeah, some of the pain points is yeah, how like you said before, if one parent has been the caregiver, how is the other parent going to take care of that child, or how's my
Mm,
child going to manage and be comfortable when I'm not around? And
yes.
so, there's a lot of things that go into that. Um, so, you know, both parents are important, and so
Mm,
we want both parents would be comfortable with each other's ability to take care of that child, because whether you like it or not, that child's going to spend some time with the other
mm,
parent, whether it's just on weekends or whether it's a week at a time or vacations or even a few hours at a time. We want to make sure that that child's going to be safe and secure and well taken care of during that time. And so how do we do that? We can hopefully before the person moves out, kind of get them up to speed, or even if that's already happened, share information so that they're comfortable. They can learn ways
mm,
to address that child's behavior and needs, and who the medical professionals are in case they have to reach out to them, things like that.
mm,
A lot of times, it was in my case, the mom may be the one who's had all the contact with the schools and planning
mm,
and doctors and therapist visits, but we want to get the dad at least aware who these people are so that
mm,
they can participate if they choose to. But just knowing how to handle the physical needs, the medical needs, because some
mm,
people, like my kids have autism, not necessarily are physical challenges, even though right now one of my sons is having some physical issues. That's a whole different matter. But
mhm,
can the other parent know how to handle a G tube or other things that they need to do and administer medicine in the right way and have all the right equipment? So we wanted to make sure that that's taken care of. I have one client who shared an Amazon list with her soon to be ex-spouse, and he was able
mhm.
to take that information and order what he needed, for instance, on going on
Okay.
vacation and
Yeah.
planning things. So they may not, want to have um, direct communication, or they may not want one feeling like the other parent or ex-spouse is trying to tell them what to do and how to do it. That's sometimes
Mm,
not received well. And that's why you want
mm,
to try to do it as a neutral tone as possible. Like, as I mentioned, to have it as a resource as opposed to trying to dictate and prescribe how to do something. There may be
mm,
different ways to parent, and sometimes that's hard to accept too. But if they have the information, then hopefully that parent can then take that and do the best they can on theirs. And so, what I learned the first time my kids were away, which was hard, um, was that they're going to have a different parenting experience because of different
mm.
personalities and so on. And that's okay, right? As long as they come home safe and fed and healthy, then that's the important thing. Um, and so, yeah, you can work on ways to hopefully have some more consistency between homes, but really you can't dictate how another parent is going to parent in their home.
Exactly.
That's
Mm,
something hard to accept sometimes.
mm. And ultimately, it can be beneficial for a child to grow up having to deal with different parenting styles, different personalities. It teaches us life skills and social skills and all sorts of things. So it can be valuable, even though it might be quite challenging in the beginning.
It is. And one thing I'll add to that is, so what I've had to teach my son is to advocate for himself and
Mm,
express his needs to his dad,
mm,
for my son who's more verbal. Because in the past, maybe he wasn't comfortable sharing
mm,
those kind of feelings or requests or needs, or when something didn't feel right, to be able to
mm,
dad and to be able to, tell me, right, as well. We want to keep the lines of communication open. But I think that's the biggest skill that we can share with a child who's capable of doing that, is how to advocate for themselves, not just other parents, but at school
mm,
and in life. That's something, I
mm.
think that's a skill that they're always going to need.
Very, very important skill to have. and that enhances communication, and it also self-esteem and all of that when that comes online, I can say. It's such an interesting topic, and I'm thinking of many families that I've mentored through separation and divorce and the challenges that they've faced. One that's particularly coming up for me now as we're having this conversation is a family where, again, the mother was the primary caregiver of this child with special needs. And dad moved out of the house with a new love interest, and the child ended up having to spend most of the time with the new love interest and not with the dad, which was a huge challenge, which the child literally objected to very strongly, and understandably so. How would you handle a situation like that? Would we have to get the new girlfriend with the program as well, so that she can take over that care, or would you encourage the father to do it? How would you handle that?
That's a great question. And there was something recently on a Facebook post where I commented on such a situation where, um, yeah, the dad was having the new stepmom or girlfriend be the intermediary and communicate with
Mm,
the ex-wife, and that I didn't feel like that was really the right
mm,
situation either. So yeah, we want to, hopefully the dad can spend as much time with that child and be the one responsible during that parenting time. If
mm,
not, then maybe that arrangement they have is maybe not the most appropriate, right?
mm,
Maybe they're at a 50-50 situation and that person's not available and they're trying to find someone to fill in, whether it's a love interest or a nanny or somebody else. So is that really the right answer? Um, but yeah, there's a lot of feelings, I guess, that come into play, and a lot of potential um, conflict and anxiety when that person maybe is seen as a reason their parents are no longer together. So there may be some
yes,
feelings
yeah.
there, and we don't want the child to have those kind of, I guess, we want to protect them. These are adult conversations, adult
Mm,
topics. So we want to protect the child from really um, delving into the reasons behind the divorce. We have to just say, this is the situation, we're getting divorced,
mm,
not really focus on the cause. So sadly, a lot, they may overhear some things, maybe, mom or dad
mm,
talking to somebody. And sometimes we think that children who don't speak or not verbal don't understand, but they can understand everything that we're saying. They're internalizing
mm,
it, and then they're torn because they're half mom, half dad, and their loyalties then are
mm,
questioned, and they question themselves. So we want to protect our kids, for one, from being in the middle of that conflict, for sure, when we're talking to lawyers or other people. But um, we want to eventually, hopefully, get to a point where if that person is going to be um, remain with the dad, for instance, then to try to have that person understand the child with disabilities. Maybe they haven't um, learned all those things about being a special needs parent or taking care of
mm,
a child that has these needs. Have them learn about behavior, have them learn about the disability, how they can best either parent, co-parent, or be a provider of care for that
mm,
child.
mm,
We
mm,
want to have, um, depending on the situation, hopefully have everyone get along as best we can. Granted, that may or may not happen, but we want to do it in a civil way. We don't want anyone to be spiteful or to try to hurt anybody, because that just becomes a problem. I've seen that cases where people are
mm,
special needs and not, where um, that a child may not be comfortable going to another parent's home because of the way a step parent may act
mm,
towards them. So we want to,
mm,
have them in a happy, healthy home as best we can, no matter what the situation. The reality is, there may be a new love interest. They may be a step parent at some point, and so we want to have the child's time in that setting be as peaceful and positive as possible.
mm. And then I'm also thinking, I have seen in many cases, especially when there's high conflict in the divorce process, the last person the parent wants to hear from or be told what to do is the other partner or the other parent. So they're not open to learning from the other parent who maybe has the experience of taking care of the child. They don't want to communicate with that person. So they need to literally be trained or brought up to speed by somebody else, which makes it very, very difficult.
Right, for sure. And that's where maybe a third party can come in and be the
Mm,
intermediary. Like I mentioned before, we don't, especially in a high conflict situation or where feelings are raw and these things are new, they don't want to get advice or be told
mm,
to do or feel like they're being controlled in some way by another parent and having that perspective. So by having a neutral party come in, whether someone like myself or a financial professional or a mental health professional or behavior person or someone from the school saying, okay, this is what the child needs and these are some ways to address their needs. Here's some
mm,
things that both parents can do. So that way one parent doesn't feel like they're being told what to do and how to do it,
mm.
because yeah, that doesn't go well a lot of the time. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we want that parent to take ownership of that role, and for them to seek out the information, um, if they can, but if not, have it available to them in a very neutral, helpful type format.
I'm curious to know, in your experience in your part of the world, how do you find schools offering support for divorce situations? In South Africa, I'm actually ashamed to say most schools are still not really aware of what the needs are of a family that's going through separation and divorce, and they're not geared to really support them. They're not informed about um, parenting agreements and how important it is to keep both parents involved in the school and communicate with both parents. Things like getting the reports out to both parents, getting the newsletters and all sorts of arrangements out to both parents, and allowing both parents access to the school and to the children. How is that going in your part of the world?
Yeah, I would say that's common as well. I'm in the US, and I can tell you, I didn't I tried to ask the school for supports, and they
Mm-hmm.
were not really available. They had tried to refer me to, find outside counselors. Granted, there was a group that tried to help one of my children, but they really weren't set up for that either. And so, before you ask me about the community, yeah, we want to tell the school, we want to let them know what's happening in the home, because that way, if they're seeing some behaviors or change in the child, they can understand why. It may not just be that they're being aggressive and defiant just because there's something at home. If they understand there's something going on at home, they can
Mm-hmm.
be more caring and provide more TLC, as they call it here, tender loving care and support, and maybe find someone at the school, a guidance counselor or somebody to help.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, when we go through changes, some people may show different behaviors and may show aggression, like maybe one of my kids, did in the past, or maybe their grades suffer or socially they're withdrawn. So we want to have the school understand what's going on. So even though they may not have the supports, we want to at least have them in the loop. We talked about the being taboo earlier that we may not want to share, but that is really important to do that. I have a video about where I share about that as well. But yeah, I feel like the schools, need some support to understand
Mm-hmm.
how to deal with these situations, whether or not there's a child with special needs or not. I just recently, this week, presented to a group of school professionals about transition, ways to look at not just divorce per se, but what parents go through, what the children go
Mm-hmm.
through, and things to plan for the future. So they have a bit different perspective. They have some more resources, and they can maybe know who to reach out to as well to support both the parents and their children, no matter what type of transition or challenge they're going through. So yeah, I think it's a matter of parents sharing about their situation, but also, yeah, there's definitely ways that the schools can um, try to learn as well how to navigate some of these situations. They try to be as neutral as they can, but like you said, sometimes one parent um, may be the decision maker, I guess, in terms of educational decisions. And then things are a little bit cleaner, because when you have, say, 50-50 type decision making, each parent can try to undo what the other one has done.
Yes.
Maybe
Mm.
that's just out of spite or whatever it is, or maybe each parent has a different view on how to navigate these decisions. And then schools are in the middle, and that's why they um, try to keep the things as simple as possible for them.
Mm.
So for instance, with a in the U.S. with a child with special needs, there's annual meetings, there's update meetings, and there's ways for both parents to participate. But historically, if one parent has been involved then hopefully they can continue to be and not have someone who hasn't been involved um,
Mm,
try to change things just because, right? We want to bring them up to speed
mm,
on how to understand the school's position and why things are have been handled the way they have, so that the school can hopefully continue to include both of them on communication. Sometimes you maybe need to set up separate meetings. Maybe that's more
mm,
practical to do as
mm,
opposed to have both parents together at a conference. Maybe you have one conference, one parent, another one with the other one, or maybe you do it online so there's less
mm.
friction and conflict going on.
Minimize the animosity that they could develop in a situation like that. Mary Ann, I'm so grateful for this conversation. There's so much we can talk about because it's really a tough one for parents to deal with, and it impacts the whole family. So thank you again for chatting to me. I'm wondering what you would say to parents if you could get to them right at the beginning when they are at a point where they have now decided they want to separate. Let's say, for example, they're in agreement that they want to separate, which is also not always the case. I know that. Where do you start with them? What would you say to them right at the beginning?
Yeah. So normally I work with one parent as a coach, but I'm also now becoming a mediator and a parenting
Mm,
coordinator where I have opportunity to work with both parents. So I would
mm,
say to either one or both is think, okay, what's your relationship is not working, and divorce is the right answer that you've both come to, or at least one of you has come to, and then the other one has to accept that decision and figure out
mm,
how do we have the situation be as um, peaceful as possible so that we can get through this in the best possible way and our children can get through this in the
mm,
best
mm,
possible way, because we don't want to be fighting in front of our children. We don't want to be creating stresses, whether it's financial, emotional kind of conflict that the child is going to be exposed to and then suffer as a result of. what
mm,
what would you do if you were married and we had to plan for that child? How would you handle that? And that's the kind of approach we like to take. um, you know Putting that child first. We want to do a child-centered divorce as much as we can, right? It's not
mm,
always going to be that way, but we want to eventually come to that way of thinking: is what do we need to do for that child? What are their needs, and how can we get there? And then you can decide based on your circumstance, their caregiving responsibilities, the financial responsibilities, what's the best way to handle parenting time, possession time, and the support that may need to come to
mm,
that child.
mm. Great. That's yeah, exactly what I would do too. How do you deal with a parent who has not really been involved in the caring of such a child with special needs, who now has to suddenly take on that responsibility? How do you help them get on board, get with the program, so to speak?
Right, it's a good question. Most of my work is with the caregivers, but for somebody who has not had that role, I let
Mm,
them know that they're important in the child's life. They may not
mhm,
have been there taking care of them during the day, have been as involved maybe at school and other appointments, but they can still learn. They can still be involved. They're still important to that child
mm,
and to that child's development and to their future. And
mhm,
so, how can we learn what we need to do? How can you um, get that information from the other parent so that it's done in a way that uh, provides as much harmony as we can,
mhm,
and and support for that child, knowing that's the goal. And how can we get that information from other professionals? Maybe the other parent
mm,
can't share the information, or you're not ready to do that just yet, to reach out to the other parent. How can we learn how to take care of that child? It could be through books, it could be through different conferences and
mm,
other professionals out there to share some of the information. So we have to do as a parent would do when they're first getting a diagnosis for a child. We do a lot of
mm,
research. We want to see what works and try different approaches and see
mm,
what's there. But I could say best practices, if the child is older and these methods have been tried and tested by the other parent, then we want to try to be as consistent between
mm,
homes so that we're causing less stress we talked about before about transition for the child. What's working at home? Let's see if we can make it work in the other child's home. It doesn't have to look exactly the same, but we want to have as consistent as we can routines and bedtimes and ways to promote positive behavior.
Mm, great, that makes perfect sense. And how would you support a parent who has been the primary caregiver, who now needs to let go of it and hand over to the other parent whom they not confident in their ability, they maybe don't trust to take care of their children?
Right. So I guess I would ask them, what makes you think that the other parent can't learn those things or can't be a good parent?
Mm,
Perhaps they've already, when they were married, um, the other parent has taken care of that child or participated,
mm,
whether a few hours at a time or playtime or maybe for a few hours while you went out shopping. So it's not like it'll be the first time ever that they're left alone with them. So trust that they've learned from that experience and that they can reach out to you if need be and they can get supports they need and that child will be okay. I know that was hard for me, as I mentioned before. How are my kids going to manage that and navigate that? And granted, it took some time to get used to that, but then we were okay. And I can tell you, um, it gave me as a parent who had the primary caregiving responsibility some downtime, which is greatly
mm,
needed. So take that opportunity when the child is with the other parent, not to worry, not to take your time and energy to think
mm,
so much about that, what could go wrong or how are, things like that, the negative aspects, but take that time for you to maybe do some self-care, go out with friends, or even catch up around the house, things that you've been meaning to do and just hard to do when the kids are there. I know that it provides me now an opportunity to decompress. Sometimes I do things out socially. Sometimes I'm just there taking care of things I need to do. But yes, parents need a break, whoever it is, depending if you're the primary caregiver or not. We need a break and some other avenues that are important to us and bring us fulfillment.
mm, mm. Great advice. Great advice. Thank you for that. I'm just thinking, when we talked about the different duties that parents have, I developed a product called the Family Contribution Calculator, which consists of a bunch of questions in 7 different categories where we determine what roles the parents fulfill, which parents take responsibility for the different needs of the children and the family as a whole in different aspects. We're talking about emotional parenting and support, physical aspects, intellectual aspects, the logistical things, the financial aspects, all sorts of things. And that calculator it's an online form basically that you fill in and that you get the results. Actually has in many cases been an eye-opener for the parties to realize, sure, but you've actually been carrying most of the weight and the responsibility in this aspect, taking care of us as a family. And the other parents actually been taking most responsibility in another area. So that is a very valuable exercise that I do with my clients in order to determine who actually works best where and who functions well in which aspects. And then when we work out how we're going to co-parent post the separation, it helps to determine who's going to take care of what, who's going to be responsible for what. And it helps to get people to also acknowledge that you're better at this than I am, but I'm stronger with this than you are, and kind of learn to let each other take the lead in certain aspects. Do you think that can work with special needs children? Would it be just as effective or helpful?
Huh. Yeah, most definitely. I love that tool. I think that's a great way to show that each parent has a contribution and is to be valued for what they bring to the table and the
Mm,
capabilities that they have and can share. So yeah, definitely, I think that can apply to all families, especially ones with a child with a disability and special needs, because it shows that it is a team effort, right? Even though you may not be living in the same home, each parent can, in case whatever situation, for instance, my son was having some medical issues, and so I knew my ex had more knowledge around some medical uh,
mm,
uh, background and could provide some guidance there. So definitely, I wouldn't say defer to them necessarily, but learn from them, share with them,
Mm,
and listen to what they offer in terms of advice and perhaps courses of action that can help you taking care of that child, because that's what you're both wanting. You're both wanting a
mm,
happy,
mm.
healthy child, and how can each parent contribute to that, and how can we help each other get to that point?
Yeah, and we want the cooperation or to collaborate in raising our family as best as we can. And I know my last question to you would probably be difficult to answer because it depends on the exact special needs of a child. But if I could generalize to the extent to say that as a child grows older, those needs change. They might become less and they might become more, and they are different. How do we accommodate that in a parenting plan post-divorce, because we don't know what the future will hold? How do you support people to try and get an agreement together that best accommodates the future, but also the possibilities that things will change?
Right. So definitely things are going to change and the child's abilities hopefully will develop over time. And like you said, there'll be new challenges that we have to face.
Mm,
So it depends on the age of the child. If the child is young, say 5 years
mm,
old, we don't know what that future is going to hold. A
mm,
parenting plan at age 5 is going to look very different than one at 12 or 17 or when they're becoming an
mm,
adult. And even then, the parent plans aren't really, at least in where I am, once they're 18, they don't really use those because
mm,
not legally, binding for that. But
mhm,
um, yeah, we want to look. We can always revisit. I guess the point is you can revisit that. We should make
mhm,
checkpoints every so often, say every 5 years or whatever may be right for your family to revisit that. What is the
mm,
level of care needed? Maybe the level of support in terms of financial or other things, which are always,
mm,
people want to discuss and revisit that. Sometimes we have to reevaluate at age 18. Do we still want to
mm,
consider um, the disability, or have those, does it still meet the needs for this constant care as we thought it might? Or maybe we want to wait to see, and then at 18, yes, we still definitely have a lot of issues and need the ongoing child support for sure. So yeah, we want to be, if we need to, be as prescriptive as we can in a parenting plan, but we always want to provide flexibility, right? Because things are going to
mm,
change, we're going to change, circumstances will change. So we don't want just follow to the letter of the divorce decree, like this is
mm,
exactly how we discussed
mhm,
it. The decree and the parenting plan is there if we can't come to another agreement, right? So
mm,
have that as your backup, right? But be flexible in your approach. Switch weekends, switch, have
mm,
the other parent involved, where it's appropriate to say, okay, I'm going out of town this week. Can you help? And so on. Because otherwise it gets to a point where it's a tit for tat situation and
mm,
people are not,
mhm,
they don't want to help each other because that's the way they wrote it and that's the way they feel like they have to stick to it. But it doesn't have to be that way, I guess is the point. So
mm,
you want to do a parenting plan to help think about the future, but you're not going to have thought about everything. But I will say for people who are concerned about the other parent's contribution and involvement in the future, we want to phrase things in such a way that kind of open that door. With some people, when the child is young, may not think about expenses when the child is in high school or about to
mm,
graduate, driving
mhm,
lessons and other things, expenses that may come into play, right? So we want to um, allocate maybe certain percentages of whatever it might be for each parent to
mm,
continue to be involved, either under 18 and then over 18 as well. So we want to
mm,
also have in there some language about disability. Some people shy away from that, but it's best to have that in there. That way, if you need to go back and make modifications, it's been documented somewhere, and a judge, if the
mm,
judge needs to be involved, can see that yes, there is a child with a disability, and that's why certain actions or decisions may make sense based on the past history and diagnosis of that child.
mm, mm. And come to think of it, I'm just thinking whether this is actually necessary to look at divorce already, but when we have children with special needs, there's a lifelong care that we have to provide for them. What about if we assume that we're going to live a full, long life, when we're no longer there, who takes care of those children? Do you look at it? Do you look that far ahead when you're looking at a divorce agreement, a parenting plan, when there are special needs?
You can, not so much in the plan, but definitely you want to work with professionals who understand that, who can help you plan for the future. I can tell you whether or not you're in a divorce situation, these are questions that are constantly on the mind of a special needs parent. What's going to happen
Yes.
when I'm not around, when I'm not able to take care of my child, or whatever the case may be. And there's certain ways to structure agreements and documents so that the child is protected in the future, not just in terms of care, but also financially. Because if you have money going to the child that doesn't go to a trust, then they may be disqualified for government benefits, for instance. So that's why you want to work with professionals who can help you plan, like you said, for the life care costs of that child, but also how to protect them and their benefits once you're no longer there or other situations.
Yeah. Good. Mary Ann, thank you so much. This has been quite insightful. I really appreciate your contribution. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
My pleasure. I'm happy to help people if they're thinking about divorce, going through it, or even past that point, how to better co-parent and be there for your kids and help them in the best way possible.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.